control. A lot on the line in Georgia. President Trump and Joe Biden making final pitches to Georgia electorates, asking them to get out and vote and make sure that their vote is counted. Here to talk about it is David Dulio, Oakland University professor of political science. David, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, too. This has sort of been going on for a while. A lot of people have been voting. I think more than 3 million people have already cast their vote in Georgia, but nobody's taking any chances. They want to make sure their side wins the day of vote.
Absolutely. The stakes, and the reason for that is the stakes really couldn't be any higher for what's going to happen nationally in terms of the political context for the next 2 years, based on the outcomes of those two races tomorrow. No vote is being taken for granted. No stone left unturned. We've seen hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars spent across the state of Georgia. It's a knockdown, drag out right till the last minute.
Oh, the money that is being spent is unbelievable. Just record numbers of millions of dollars being spent. It's absolutely crazy. Now, can you explain a little bit why there's a runoff in Georgia and not everywhere?
Sure. It's, under the Constitution, states are empowered to set their own rules for elections. They can, for instance, have, we've got various types of primary elections across the country. What we do here in Michigan is different than what happens in California, for example. And this is another example of that, where Georgia has decided that on Election Day in November, if one candidate doesn't get a majority of votes, 50% plus one more vote, the top two vote getters from that election have to square off in this one-on-one runoff 2 months later.
And Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, they're Republicans, and they were in Congress and were running for re-election. They got the majority of the votes the first time around, but not enough to be declared a winner. What do you expect is happening now? I mean, is the whole table flipped over as a result of how the presidential election went and all this new money coming to town?
Well, I think that's we won't know that until tomorrow, unfortunately, or actually, we probably won't know for a couple of days after Election Day, given the way things played out in a very, very close presidential election, as you know, back in November, with Joe Biden carrying the state by roughly 12,000 votes. So it's likely to be very, very close. I think we're a little bit in the dark in terms of handicapping this one, because polling has been conspicuously absent. And I don't know if that's because, well, it's probably not because there's no money in it, but it's because it's polling these days is tough. And I don't know if pollsters are willing to go in there in an uncertain electoral context with the end of one presidential administration and the beginning of another. Maybe that throws it into flux a little bit. I think Georgia is a Republican state, typically, and you can hear the hemming and hawing, I guess, in my voice there, right? But because we really don't know, is the Biden victory from November, does that signal a shift in Georgia, or do we sort of return to normal in these Senate contests? You mentioned it, that in both races, Loeffler and Perdue got the most votes on Election Day in November. The Perdue race was a bit more telling, I think, because it was Perdue and Warnock and a couple of third-party candidates. So it was more closer to what we're likely to see tomorrow in the following days than the Loeffler Ossoff race, which included a number of other candidates, and they split up the vote much more in a splintered fashion. So, I think that the conventional wisdom is the Republicans are favored, but in a context, an electoral year like 2020, and here we are in 2021, who really knows? All bets are off.
Yeah, so there's no such thing as typical anymore, but typically there would be fewer votes in a runoff than in the general election, and it looks like that's the case so far, depending on what the turnout looks like tomorrow.
Correct, and sorry to cut you off, but that's one thing that might favor Republicans, is that when we see those runoffs in places like Georgia, the smaller electorate tends to favor the Republican candidates, because it's frankly Democrats who are more likely to be voters that come into and out of the process, where Republicans are more likely to be the habitual voters.
What about security? I mean, we're watching the president and other Republicans say, "Look, Georgia cheated. They pulled suitcases out from under tables. The election is a fraud." You have Democrats saying, "Absolutely not. They voted. They counted. They recounted. The election is accurate." What's going to happen from that standpoint of people feeling like their votes are getting counted accurately?
Well, I think it's only going to be more of the same. I think the winners are going to have confidence, and the losers aren't. We saw that between the 2016 and 2020 presidential contests, where after 2016 there was a huge partisan gap in trust and confidence in the legitimacy of the election outcome between Democrats and Republicans, with Republicans having much more confidence that the election was free and fair in 2016 than Democrats, and vice versa in 2020. So I think it all depends on where your favorite candidate finishes.
Now the news cycle today is filled with President Trump's phone call that was leaked out, and it was with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, allegations that of abuse of power by Trump. The Republicans say no, Trump was just trying to tell the Georgia Secretary of State to do his job and make sure that the vote was accurate. Do you think all of this news can play a role in tomorrow's actual vote when people show up in person?
Well, it might be something that spurs some folks who were thinking about sitting out and not voting. It might spur them to get up and go to the polls tomorrow and cast a ballot. I think if there's any effect at this late date, that's probably it.
So tell us a little bit about some of the issues that could be impacted if the Congress stays with the Republicans versus switches over to the Democrats.
Well, sure. I think that it really hinges on one issue, right? And that is, if Democrats have 51 votes in the Senate, or even 50 votes in the Senate, because Vice President Harris would be the tie-breaking vote to give them the 51 votes that they need. But if Democrats have a governing majority in the Senate, they could choose to change the long-standing rules of the Senate, which allow for the filibuster, which, without a long discussion of it, basically means that anything to get done in the Senate, you need 60 votes to do it, to overcome a filibuster. If Democrats get rid of the filibuster, which they did in 2013 for judicial nominees less under the Supreme Court level, but if they get rid of the legislative filibuster, they can do anything they want with 51 votes. They can pass any legislation they want as long as they keep their members together. That could mean a fresh round of COVID-19 relief. It could mean, on a different level, less of it would be a legislative action, to adding members to the Supreme Court. So we're really looking from across the spectrum on things that could change, could happen, could be impacted by the outcome of these races tomorrow. But it all does hinge on that filibuster rule change, should Democrats go forward with that. Because without the filibuster change, it's still that 60-vote threshold that's really, really tough to get over.
And that's why we're seeing so much money being poured into Georgia on the verge of a very, very important election. David Dooley, Oakland University professor of political science, thanks for being on the Mitch Albom Show.